Thank you. I now call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order at 7:02 p.m. We'll take a moment of silence to be followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The fire department's on the way. Have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Here.
I knew what you meant.
Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. That's right.
It's not a trick question.
Mr. Scrivano?
Here.
Mrs. McCullough?
Present.
Mr. Siegel?
Here.
Mr. Connor?
Here.
Mr. Escobedo?
Here.
With 7 present, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I'd like to thank the guys in the back, Rod Waddell and Connor Childers, who are working behind the scenes to produce our board meeting broadcast on Channel 20. Thank you, boys. They're in the back. We'll take a moment to recognize and celebrate outstanding contributions of our students and staff. And Mr. Earl Dotson, Jr., you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, board members. 4 Auburn High School seniors were named semifinalists earlier this month for the 2019 National Merit Scholarship. Melise Deek, Gabriel Rately, Ethan Strombeck, and Lael Verace. All students in Auburn's Gifted Academy, and they are among the approximately 16,000 semifinalists in the prestigious National Merit Scholarship Program. The nationwide pool of semifinalists represents less than 1% of U.S. high school seniors. The National Merit Scholarship Program honors students who show exceptional academic ability and potential for success in rigorous college studies. They can continue in the competition for some 7,500 scholarships worth more than $31 million that will be offered in the spring. We're looking forward to seeing what's next for these talented seniors, and we hope to congratulate all of them in the coming months as winners of this prestigious scholarship. Congratulations to these outstanding students, to their parents and families, and to their teachers and school staff who support them. Please join me in congratulating these outstanding students who are here with us this evening.
Congratulations to the parents. Thank you for being here tonight. We are now at the petitions and communications portion of our meeting, where we invite the public to make comments. The First Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees the rights of citizens to petition their government, as well as provides for freedom of speech. Also, the Illinois School Code requires that there be a time at regular and special meetings for public comment. Thus, we are following those mandates during this petitions and communications portions of our agenda. According to our board policy 2.230, the public comments portion is limited to a total of 30 minutes. The board will not respond to comments at this time. If it is appropriate, you'll be contacted in a timely manner by staff in response to your questions. In order to allow sufficient time for the business of the board and to conduct our meetings in an efficient and effective manner, We are requesting that you comply with the guidelines that are posted, and each speaker will be allowed no more than 2 minutes to address the board. It's not appropriate to address individual board members or individual administrators or discuss matters that would otherwise be confidential in such open meetings. We only have one speaker tonight, so I have to read the next part, but there is a clock on the wall to help you with your 2 minutes. We thank you so much for your interest and your cooperation with our guidelines. We have one speaker tonight, and that is Nancy Godowski. Okay. If you'll hit the button to turn the microphone on, Nancy. Thank you for being here.
Okay. Integrated learning and site-based management were brought up last school board meeting to address low test scores for RPS. Even the timing of the test was blamed. All of us old-timers, I'm speaking for myself, have heard this before. This was done at least 20 years ago and didn't work, as evidenced by test scores continually dropping. Once we took out phonics and spelling, scores started their downward spiral. We got whole language instead, and things really fell to pieces. The first 3 years of school are the most critical, and students are eager to learn to read, write, and spell. They haven't been corrupted by cell phones yet. Afterward, they can read to learn. In these critical years, just focus on reading, writing, spelling, and basic arithmetic. I can almost guarantee if they get these basic skills down pat in their early years, while they're eager to learn, test scores will go up and discipline problems will go down. The reading programs for middle and high school students who can't read at grade level incorporate both phonics and spelling. And these students are now doing well. I think that program should be expanded so we can help more students in those levels. That should also tell you how much and important phonics and spelling are to reading. The district test scores have been analyzed and studied to death over the years. We keep hearing everything should be data-driven. Every administration says that, and I've been through a lot of administrations. Then we heard there is not enough longitudinal data because tests have changed, so we are back to square one. This is just stalling for time and grasping for straws. Your experimentation should be over by now after a generation of students have already been lost. Just do what a few board members said at last meeting. Come up with a detailed plan. Our students' futures depend on it. And, I have a few minutes, but anyway,
Okay.
I was gonna say, these cell phones are getting out of hand, and now today when I was subbing in my last hour class, they have little speakers, and they put in their backpacks and then blast the whole classroom, and they say, I don't have my cell phone out. So they're getting smarter about how they're doing things, but they're not paying attention in class. And this is at the high school level. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Okay, we'll move on then to our next agenda item, our board member comments. Mr. Connor.
I want to, through experience now, I've done a couple tours that happens to be at the new school. But I want to say yet again, what a fabulous job the students do as student ambassadors. They were all composed, I think these were 4th and 5th graders, but their composure is just absolutely stellar. I was really proud of them. They know their facts. They're good listeners. This is great preparation, I think, no matter what career they take. And so what I'd say is congratulations on that particular program, and really let's keep that up, and if anything, expand it, because it seems to me to be really successful.
Thank you. Any other board members have comments? Mr. Escobedo.
So, yeah, I'll take again just another opportunity just because the media's here again, and I hate to do that. But so what we mentioned last time is that we're working with administration. Everyone's focused on academic achievement this year. So again, just making the note out there that parents, teachers, administrators reach out to us, what's working, what's not, what can make a difference. Parents, you got to become your own advocate for your own kids. If you see something that's not working, raise it to your principal, talk to your teacher, work things out, and if things are still not working, please come to us, because we're really focused on academic achievement this year. And I hope that the community, parents, and everybody starts watching, because if we don't, then we all got to be held accountable, including us as board members. And I just hope that we all as a community pull in and finally start making a difference in academic achievement. Standardized test scores have dropped significantly year over year, and that can't happen, where it's no longer a sense of urgency. It's really a state of emergency now, and we need to all pull together and somehow make a difference going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, then we'll move on to our next section of our agenda, which is the consent portion. For consent items, we have the meeting minutes from 9:25, payroll, accounts payable, purchase orders, construction bid request log, contracts under $10,000, and travel. Recurring contracts, the independent contractor Christine Morlock, workplace staffing contract, and the Nusella PRO. The other consent items are the MOUs, memorandums of understanding after school coordinator differential, and project lead the way differential, as well as the freedom of information log. Is there a motion and a second to approve these consent items?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Okay.
second by Mr. Dixon. Are there any consent items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Mr. Siegel.
8A.
Okay. Mr. Escobedo.
8B.
B. Okay. Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the items not pulled.
Mr. Dixon,
Yes.
Mr. Rollins,
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano,
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch,
Yes.
Mr. Siegel.
Yes.
Mr. Connor,
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay, I'll take a motion and a second to approve item 8A, which is the independent contractor for Christine Morlock.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor,
Second?
second by Mr. Siegel. Any discussion or questions? Mr. Siegel?
Yeah, I'm fine with supporting the contract, but there's just something that kind of caught my eye and wondered if you'd be able to answer a question about it. There ends up being about a 20% variance between 205 and surrounding districts in demand for services. I think the state average is 2.4% of all students with speech issues, and it was 3 in the surrounding. I mean, 20, I realize these are not giant numbers, but a 20% variance seemed kind of steep, and any ideas what accounts for that?
I'm wondering if it includes our EC programming. Not all districts have, I'm just wondering if the surrounding districts have a large EC program, as we do. I can look into that and get back to you on that one.
That would account for them having a higher need for services than we would?
There would be more students, yes.
Oh,
that
because
qualify.
if they have a larger EC population? Okay. It's interesting. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Now I'll have the coordinator then call the roll. on
So,
the- I'm
just
sorry,
to
Mrs.
be
McCullough?
clear, what are you getting back to him on? Because I'm sure you're going to copy all the board members on it.
Sure, I can do that. In terms of the surrounding districts, looking at those to determine what programming they provide as compared to us.
I think would really be to identify where their need happens to be versus ours. Why do 3% of their students versus 2.4% of ours have these speech needs? I mean, if it had been like 2.5 versus 2.4, but it seems like it's a big
I'd rather do the
variance.
2.4 than the...
Oh, for sure. Oh, no, definitely.
that's what we're
I'm not complaining. I'm just curious as to what would have,
What's driving that?
yeah, what would have driven that variance.
I mean, it could be the way that we qualify as well. We're pretty consistent across identifying needs and providing services. I can look into that for sure. Get back to you all.
Okay, I'll have the coordinator then call the roll on the approval of item 8A, the independent contractor.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Now I'll take a motion and a second for the approval of item 8B, which is the workplace staffing contract.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Siegel. Questions or discussion on workplace staffing contract? Mr. Escobedo.
Yeah, so, and this is again, just a general comment, not necessarily specific to this contract, but it's just in similar, kind of applying the same standard to, for example, when we talked about the lobbyist contract. So, you know, when we see contracts like this come up on recurring contracts, you know, where were they approved? What specific, you know, so if we've had a contract with a individual or company or service for X amount of years, what specific measures have been taken that we know we're getting value for that service out of the specific contract? I guess looking for metrics in terms of, for example, this is specific to workplace staffing. For staffing, when we talk about our goals with proper staffing, what are the metrics?
Mr. Zediker?
Yep, so this is a reoccurring because we had a contract with them last year. We did not have them one prior to that. When we look at metrics for some of our staffing, it depends on the level of position that we're looking for. But we do have a metric out there with Workplace in terms of 30 days to fill a vacancy that we have used their services for. We've also evaluated in past searches with other firms, the quality of candidate that was sent our way, as well as the hireability of candidates. And so those are all the things that we look at if we're talking about staffing in general. But the biggest one for us is going to be the quality of the candidate and then how fast can we fill that position.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Dixon?
And that is, and their reach is what, nationwide, locally? Where is their reach?
Again, it depends on the position. We've worked with them on an executive search where it's gone all the way to Florida. Traditionally and typically it's been more Midwest. They just have an access to a pool of candidates that may not jump onto any of our sites that we post, but through other searches and other firms that they work with, they may have leads to candidates that we normally would not.
Do we use them as for teachers?
At this point, we do not. Mr. Escobedo, follow-up question?
Did you say that, did you say that we did not have a contract with them last year?
No, we did one last year, not 2 years ago.
Not 2 years, thank you.
Okay. The coordinator then call the roll on the approval of the workplace staffing contract.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Okay. We're now at the closed session consent agenda items, including the HR organizational report and addendum, and student discipline. Unless otherwise modified below, the board adopts and accepts the hearing officer's findings and recommendations in the following cases in which students expelled or suspended are prohibited from being on school grounds and school-sponsored activities without the prior written permission of the principal. Student 4210 is expelled for the remainder of this school year. Student 4212 is expelled for the remainder of this school year through the first semester of the 1920 school year. Student 4213 is expelled through the first semester of the 1819 school year, and the 5-day suspension is affirmed for student 5005. The following students received EIAs. Student 1026, 3608, 3615, 3616, 3617, 3618, 3619, 3620, 3621, 3622, 3623, 3624, 3625, 3626, 3627, 3628, and student 3629. Is there a motion and a second to approve these closed session consent items?
So moved.
Second. Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Dixon. Any items that board members wish to have pulled for separate consideration? Seeing none, I'll accordingly then call the roll on the approval of the closed session consent items.
Mrs. McCulloch?
Yes.
Mr. Siegel?
Yes.
Mr. Connor?
Yes.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yes.
Mr. Dixon?
Yes.
Mr. Rollins?
Yes.
Mr. Scrivano?
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously.
Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is the superintendent's report. Dr. Chair.
There'll be two parts to the superintendent's update and report. The first part, we have a guest from the Erickson Institute that will be sharing a little bit of background. This is not up for approval tonight or as an action item, but we really want to give the board some background prior to bringing that forward. And Mrs. Detman will eventually, along with Mr. Dotson, will be bringing that forward, and we'll follow that up with a much more detailed look at both our high school and our elementary scorecard. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Detman to introduce our guest.
Sure. We have with us tonight Jacqueline Vasquez. She's the Associate Director for the Early Development Instrument at the Erickson Institute, which is a graduate school in child development. So she's here tonight to give you a formal introduction to the tool. You'll be learning a lot more through a PDSA presentation next Tuesday at Committee of the Whole. And alongside me next Tuesday, we'll have community partners from Alignment Rockford and Transform Rockford as well. So kind of a teaser and to give you some information to really digest prior to that presentation. I'll hand it over to Ms. Vasquez now for her presentation.
Thank you, Heidi, and thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Am I loud enough here? Okay. I left you with a folder with additional handouts for you, and my card is in there if you have some follow-up questions. But I'd like to introduce you to the Early Development Instrument. So, the Maasai community in East Africa typically greet each other instead of "Hi, how are you?" with the question of, "And how are the children?" Because if the children are well, then those that care for the children are well, and the environment around them is safe and clean, and conditions are set up for children to thrive. So at Erickson, we're asking the same question of all of our communities that we partner with through the Early Development Instrument, because we know that there are sensitive periods in brain development, and those sensitive periods are optimal for developing certain capacities and skills that lead to healthy development. This tool ultimately helps to identify those precise opportunities. The Early Development Instrument is a population measure. Actually, if you think about it, we use it as a community needs assessment. That population measure is real jargony, so it really is a community needs assessment. In Australia, they use it as a kindergarten needs assessment, but they call it their kindergarten census. It's a pulse check of all kindergarten students in an entire community, not just the public school, but private schools, parochial schools, all children in a given boundary. It provides precise data at a community level measure of school readiness for all children that planners can use to policy and systems build. It's also a holistic measure of school readiness and early development that is consistent with the definition of school readiness by the National Education Goals Panel. I'm going to show you the 5 key developmental domains on the next slide, but you also have a handout in your folder that kind of goes into detail each of these developmental domains. It's a survey of 103 questions for each kindergarten teacher to fill out per student. Now that sounds very heavy, but typically it takes about 15 minutes per child to complete. The teacher is away from the student, and we offer a substitute or a stipend for the day, and that typically they're able to complete all of their surveys for their children in their classroom by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's with an average of about 30 children, 28 to 30 children. Like I said, it is completed by the kindergarten teachers, and it's typically administered every 3 years during the second half of the school year. We say every 3 years because once the data is released back, that's when the magic comes together, with the community coming around the table and having discussions on how they can support the schools, children, and their families. And so since this is rooted in community systems development work, we don't implement the tool every single year, every 3 years. The data is provided back in the form of maps and tables, and I'm going to show you a few of those maps in a moment. Here are those developmental domains that you have the handout on, and I think we can say that we recognize these words: physical health and well-being, social, emotional, language, and cognitive development. But with the EDI, it takes apart these typical domains that we see and really goes deeper and holistically when looking at a child. Physical health and well-being isn't typically just gross and fine motor skills, but it also takes a look at physical independence and readiness for the school day. Social competence and emotional maturity, those are two different skills, yet we tend to look at them together. Social competence looks at children in a structured environment. Think about school. And emotional maturity is children in an unstructured environment. Language and cognitive development, I think we can see, we typically see these: numeracy skills, basic literacy, advanced literacy. And communication skills and general knowledge, there's no additional subscales. But the beauty about the early development instrument with other tools that are currently local tools in any given community is it complements individual-based instruments. The early development instrument is not an individual assessment of children. We already have that type of assessment for our children. It does not identify specific learning abilities, nor does it recommend special education or being withheld in a grade, nor does it inform teaching approaches or instruction. And this is really important. As a former educator of 15 years in the early childhood system, it was a revolving door of assessments and then coming back to talk to me as a teacher saying, oh, you need to do this, or you need to do that, or you're missing here. This is not meant to be a measure on your teachers. It's meant to give aggregate data back to the community to have a discussion and work with that data. Also, as a former administrator of many years in Chicago Public Schools, it doesn't reflect the performance of an individual school or the quality of those schools. Since the data is produced in aggregate by census tract, it does not align with school boundaries. So we can't take a look at one area and say, oh, it's this school versus this school. It's meant for us to take a big picture look at what's happening in the community at large. Using the early development instrument. So this is really a really interesting piece. It's meant for us to take a snapshot of where our children are, kindergarten year, and identify what has been happening prior to school entry. What decisions were made, and how can we take a look at making the community stronger prior to school entry. But also, it serves as a baseline for communities to take a look at the cohort that is current and how to make decisions moving forward. It also helps policy and systems development around that entire group prior to school entry and moving forward. And since we implement this tool every 3 years, it will present with trend data, and that will also help to predict in the years to come. Most importantly, it's a catalyst for action. It's a way for the school and community members to come together and have discussions. One thing that we work with right from the beginning is who is at the table having real discussions about our children and families. Typically when we work with school systems or early childhood collaborations, the typical players are around the table. We have schools, we have early childhood, maybe the mental health, which is newer fields coming into having discussions, the medical field, public health coming to the discussion, but who else needs to be at that table? The mayor's office, public housing, parks and rec, who else needs to come to the table that supports children and families and touches them in different areas by policies, development, and discussion. So we want to make sure that everyone is having real conversations with a common data set, with the common language, which we use, the EDI. Long-term goals would be to really identify strengths and gaps in services and programs throughout the community, but also to align better equitable distribution and alignment of resources and better collaboration of cross-sector development and partnerships across the community. So while we're in our pilot years, this is our 3rd year of our pilot that will be rolled out in full to the state beyond. I would like to just highlight these 5 communities that we've been working in for the past few years. Our first pilot year was Greater East St. Louis and the Early Learning Partnership, and Kankakee County, the three communities there, Bourbonnais, Bradley, and Kankakee, the Success by Six Coalition. But as well, we've worked in, we're currently in Oak Park, Skokie, and Morton Grove, and we're hoping to be partners here in Rockford. So the data is reported back, as I said, in the form of maps and tables, but we produce a confidential school report for each school with more than 2 classrooms. Reason for it, it's not meant to be a measure on an individual teacher's abilities in their classroom. So if there's more than 2 kindergarten classrooms in a school, they will receive a confidential school report for the administrator to use to better identify distribution of resources and supports throughout their school, and for the schools at large to identify how to better use resources across the district. That is not released to the public. There is a community report that is the heat maps that I'll show you in a few moments, with tables to support that give you the entire big picture of the whole community, and a gallery walk, which will be a table of all maps and tables that support the community conversation. There's also a one-pager in there of our new interactive website where communities can go online and see their data and work with it and in real time from an app, from any desktop, so that they can have community conversations when they need to have them, wherever they want to have them. So here's a real brief overview of maps. So this is Greater East St. Louis, and this is from 2017. 30% of kindergarten students in Greater East St. Louis are vulnerable in one or more domains. So this is the community outline map here, and the community came together and identified names for each of the neighborhoods. This is a shot of the interactive web page that we have. So what I'd like to point out to you specifically, there we go, we got a little pointer here. Great. So this top level here is children that you'll see are the lowest proportion in vulnerability. So you'll see stronger, that color represents a stronger, and I know the lights are probably not the best there. But this middle color right here, this is the national average of communities that have participated in the EDI. UCLA holds a repository for all students that have completed the EDI across the nation, and we feed into that repository. And then anything below this, these are children that are highly vulnerable. Vulnerable means that children that are the bottom 10% in comparison to the national average. But if these children don't have additional supports, they are not set up for success, for academics or social success later in life. I forgot I hit arrows. So here we go. This is really on track, at risk, and vulnerable. Now, as you can see, that on track is that 100 to 26 percentile. At risk is that swing population that at any time can go into on track or vulnerable, and there's that vulnerable percent. We tend to focus right here on vulnerable and at risk. Typically, we automatically want to see vulnerability, and that's what you'll get in your maps, are the vulnerable heat maps. But in your tables, you'll be able to see on track, and what at risk plus vulnerable children equals is not on track. And you'll be able to see that entire population together, so you can see what that looks like as far as percentage and your actual number of students. So here's that map again. But I did leave you a one-pager as well in your folder on some key highlights of what our communities have been doing with the data. Because data is one thing, but if you're not using it, then what's the point of gathering data? Our communities have came together and had some really exciting things happening. They've applied for grants. East St. Louis was awarded the largest award from the Preschool Expansion Grant with $6 million this year for 458 students. That was a $1 million increase from the former year, using in partnership around the Early Development Instrument data to apply for their grant. They have used it to apply for charters in identifying the most vulnerable areas in their community. Also with the layer to identify where the high quality schools are at and additional seats for their students. They use the data to bring together more cross-sector community partners to have a recommitment to early childhood, and they are starting to align services through the Children's Home and Aid and the juvenile court system through connections and support of the EDI data to better service families and children coming through the courts. Additionally, Kankakee County, they had the pre-K expansion grant as well, but they also used the data to apply for the Mental Health Initiative 2.0. They're awarded over $2.3 million over the next 7 years for a mental health initiative for the early childhood part throughout the community. They have also used the data to revamp their strategic plan, and they're about to release that shortly. But additionally, bringing in a host of new cross-sector collaborators, the local colleges and also larger colleges. They grew their community partnership and brought in city council support. They're aligning the city council agenda with the agenda of the public school system so that they have the same shared language. And they have moved the entire 3 cities into trauma-informed practices. They want to become a trauma-sensitive community based off of the conversations from their data. Now, this is a one-pager. I have about 4+ pages just from our first 2 communities. Oak Park's about to release their data, but I did want to share that with you. I know that's a lot of information, but I wanted to share that, and you do have some handouts here and my card if you have any additional questions, and I appreciate and thank you for your time.
I would just ask first if Heidi or Dr. Jarrett could talk a little bit about Erickson and how the Alignment Rockford strategic planning efforts are connected or hope to be connected.
So, and again, we will talk in much greater detail at the Committee of the Whole meeting next week. We wanted to just give you an overview because there's a lot to absorb here, and I will turn it over to Mrs. Detman to provide a lot of the details. But in general, we have a large group of community partners. In fact, about $2 million worth of volunteer hours last year were received by the district, and we have really significant need in our community. And I think what this survey and this entire process and partnership with Erickson will allow us to do is to make sure that those solutions are really well aligned with what is actually needed in our entire community. I think a most recent example would be a well-intended effort to focus on improving literacy, really just focused on literacy. And while that is important, this community conversation we had this summer, we also have to look at all 5 of the factors that put families at risk and different ways community partners can help us out. So I think whether it's Alignment Rockford or Transform Rockford or many other entities, I think what we'll be able to see is this will provide really clear ways people that want to help can help. And I'll defer to Mrs. Detman to add additional details.
I think you summarized that pretty well. Really, the impetus for this is really coming from multiple community partners who are engaged and who are motivated and who are wanting to wrap around supports for our students, and yet we lack a common understanding of what the needs of children and their families really are. And we have a tendency to really gravitate toward 3rd grade. But what we need to recognize, and I think what Erickson would advocate for, is that truly we need to start at the very beginning in order to change outcomes by 3rd grade. And so what this data set will do is allow us to kind of mobilize community support, which is where Alignment Rockford and Transform Rockford come in. And then just very briefly, as part of our pilot team, we have representation from Alignment, Transform, the City of Rockford, the REA, and the school district.
Mr. Escobedo?
Yeah, really quick. I guess we'll get more into detail. So we've, anytime you look at success stories for academic achievement in school district, there's always been, board, administration, teachers, and community. Can you speak to us a little bit about as far as what this program may yield in terms of helping us and the community, parents, the community as a whole, in terms of reaching better academic achievement, and what kind of data to guide us there?
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's a matter of bringing more people to the conversation and ensuring, when we're taking a look at, I know when I had said earlier about who's not at the table, one of our very first questions is, we tend to have ideas and know what we're already deciding for on different populations and where we need to reach, but are those families at the table having discussions and making the connection and making decisions with, or their decisions being made for families? So we want to make sure that families are present and that they're engaged through the whole process. Teachers coming to the table. As a former teacher, nobody asked me about my data and what was happening with my children. I want to make sure that we come back to the teachers and that we have some conversations that pull them into ensuring that we're all on the same page. But really thinking about how, while this is a data set that is a starting point. What comes from that is really who comes to the table and who's going to drive the work. And we always say that it's about timing coming into a community. It has to be the right time and people coming together wanting to make a change together. So when you have that many people that are ready to engage in a movement, and especially thinking about what happens in those first 111 days, those first 3 years of school, prior to school entry, 3-year-olds, I think the school system is set up to do what it's meant to do, but to close those gaps, we have to start at the beginning to make sure that gap isn't there. So really thinking about policy and systems building and working together hand in hand early so that when children come in, it makes it a lot easier for families and children to navigate the school system. Did I answer? Kind of. I mean, as far as academics, when we're thinking about how to best support in the different subdomains that are within those domains, we're looking at that movement of children coming in, but also that trend coming out. So teachers are going to be able to take deep dives into the data. Let me just show you something here. If I go back to these subdomains, it's a time that we can really focus on, here we go. This is a time that we can focus on where to target interventions and programs and skills to better support those children and families. So if we're thinking about a school system and we have additional funding to put out a literacy program for all of the schools because we see that we have, targeted skills are down by 30%, we need to take a look at the schools, school by school. Maybe this school is strong in literacy and this one needs support in mathematics. How can we better equitably distribute resources, but better distribute resources for those in need in different areas? I think it helps us take a deeper look into schools, but like I said, that's a confidential report that goes into the school system and not out to the community, because the community's part is really to take a big picture look overall. The school will be able to take this and take a look at, is it fine and gross motor skills, or do children need additional skills with physical independence? Where are they at, and how can we better support them there?
Ms. McCullough.
So you're looking at the kindergartners to tell us what we need to do for the 3-year-olds. Is that what I just heard you say?
Prior to school entry, but also for that cohort moving forward. So what we're seeing at that snapshot is telling us how they're entering. And so how we can better identify the supports and decisions made for these children prior to school entry, and how we can strengthen that as they're coming into school, as the future cohorts come in. And then also taking a look at that precise data to better plan for those children moving forward. Your whole kindergarten cohort.
And I know we're going to cover this again, but I'm just trying to understand the reports that you provide. They're not individual. If there's at least 2 classrooms, you do a report for the school, but not for individual classrooms.
No.
And there's confidential versus public. And I wonder from a FOIA perspective, what makes that confidential? What can make that confidential that somebody can't ask for it from the public?
So that would be a decision if you wanted to release your internal reports, but that negates the point of what this is in bringing everyone to the table to have a discussion about the community. It's not to shine the light on an individual school. It's about community members coming together to support the community overall. So those individual confidential school reports are meant to help identify trends and gaps within a school to help administration there. But ultimately, it's the big picture look and not the individual look. We have plenty of those assessments.
And I get that. My question to you is, I guess none of those have been FOIA'd, but if they were, what is in that report that would prevent it from us from sharing it? Because there's
It's the
no
individuals.
individual.
It's the aggregate report of the students in that school, so more than 2 classrooms, and it will just be the aggregate report of, and it's only a table, it will not be the maps provided back for the schools, but it is just the tables of aggregate of all the students in that individual school. Let me just clarify, the data once gathered, since it's on the individual level, it's then geocoded back to their address, and once it's on the map into a census tract, the private information is then wiped. And if there are 10 or less students, that data is suppressed, and then that census tract will be asked to be blended with another census tract, so that it's not to identify any children in a given area.
Mr. Connor?
Help me understand, and maybe you're going to talk about this at committee of the whole, on the census tract, that, if I heard you correctly, was public-private, charter, homeschooling, whatever, right?
All kindergarten students in any geographic boundary.
Right. How would you, if you will, guarantee the participation of those other entities, since we're the ones that are
So there needs to be an 80% threshold to meet valid and
80%
reliable.
of the population?
Of the entire population of a geographic boundary to meet valid and reliable results. I believe the public school system here meets that percentage, but we're also reaching out to additional private charter parochial schools to join, but only after there is consent from the public school, and then that will be part of the process moving forward to ensure that we get more children in the geography. And it's just an ask, and that would be on the part of the board on how you work with your
I
teachers to
understand.
ensure.
Yeah, I think my question is more, so the value of this is really, if I might say so, going to be based on the public schools, because we can't guarantee the participation of anybody else. Is that true?
We can't guarantee it, but we do have a plan in place and are reaching out now to share the scope of the project, what the tool does, and the value that it can add to private parochial
Through
charters.
Transform, I assume, and
Through
maybe
Transform.
and through the governmental entities?
Correct.
All right. I think the other thing then is, when we have this data, I assume that you've got methodologies for the categorizations, so that when the assessments are done, that everybody will understand how you've categorized, because you've got your lowest to highest, you've got a number of metrics that you're putting out there, so everybody will kind of understand what that means, how that's going to be done ahead of time.
Yes, and Erickson will facilitate the process so that we develop a common narrative as a pilot team across all of our entities, Alignment Transform, the city, and the public schools, and our other community partners. So before any information is released about the data, we will have agreed to a common narrative and how we will share that information with the community.
Okay, last question is, do I assume that the other communities, such as East St. Louis, the Kankakee ones, all had more than public school involvement?
Yes.
That-
Kankakee County, Bradley, Bourbonnais were 3 public school districts, as well as 3 private schools that joined. Greater East St. Louis is 1 public school and 1 private, 1 Catholic school. Oak Park was just the public school system, and we're still working with Skokie, Morton Grove to identify the additional.
So the point is, we have done this before across the various entities. Okay.
Mr. Reynolds?
I'm just curious, because I didn't see it as part of the presentation, is this all paid for by a grant, or is this going to be a funding request?
This will be a funding request. We just wanted to introduce the concept first, and we will come forward with that.
Okay.
May I just say one thing? I'm sorry. I typically don't wade into these waters.
I'm saying, hope you don't drown.
I know, but I just feel compelled to just add a little bit of an anecdote. So just in a school today, and I had a principal, as many of you all know, that we have lots of social services agencies in our community, well-intended, but it was just interesting to hear a principal today say, hey, I just got a question about, I have 2 community organizations who I won't name. One of them wants to survey my kids. The other one wants access to my map growth data. And again, they're well-intentioned, but a lot of these places are funded by donors who want results for their money in terms of these organizations' engagement with our kids. And I think what we want to be in a position to say is, that's all great. We have lots of people who are doing this in our buildings. I think what we want to say is, that's great, but the data says, here is what our students really need, right? As opposed to this approach of just, what we do is just kind of throw spaghetti up against the wall and see what sticks. What we're trying to say is, here's the data that shows exactly what our students need. So that puts us more in a position to empower us to be much more accurate about the needs of our kids.
Thank you.
Can I just piggyback on Mike's question? You said you've already identified all the sub-districts, or however you're doing the geographic areas in Rockford, or somebody has, and that they're all at least 80% in the public school?
No, we've outlined the public school boundaries, and the majority of students at K level comes from Rockford Public Schools. We're still working to gather the additional schools to join, but that's all
So
contingent
it just
upon
needs
the
to be
process.
for the whole district, not
Or
for...
the boundaries identified by the team. So whether it's Rockford or the greater Rockford area, that's to be decided. We're still in the beginning stages here. And I will say this has been, the tool has been around for close to 2 decades out of Canada, across Canada, and a dozen other countries in the United States for over 9 years. Out of UCLA was the sole license holder. Erickson now holds the second in the United States, but we all feed into the same repository. So we do use all of the data from the vulnerability data from UCLA.
Okay. Mr. Siegel.
I know we're probably going to get to this in the second half of the presentation, which I think is going to be about the scorecard, but at the last meeting, we had a discussion about aligning goals beginning at the classroom level, but that's going to be really all the grades, I'm assuming, beyond kindergarten, and you're going to be assessing kindergarten. But do our classroom goals align with whatever assessment is created by Erickson?
Go ahead.
The Kindergarten Individual Development Survey, does have an alignment. So all kindergarten students are mandated by the state of Illinois to complete teachers to complete the kids on every student, and this does align with those. As far as the district, though, I'll defer to Heidi.
So we have metrics that align, which mean that it means that we're asking our kindergarten teachers to be collecting data right when they meet students at the beginning of the year. This tool aligns with some of those same data elements, but is not exactly the same. And so we ask them then to enter that data in January once they really know each child. So to directly answer your question, will a classroom level goal align with our systems work up here? Not necessarily. We wouldn't ask them to do that because part of our goal here is to develop a data set that will lead strategic planning to mobilize community partners. The teacher's role is really on that individual student data, and the EDI here is our population measure, our snapshot neighborhood by neighborhood, identifying assets and vulnerabilities so that we can develop policies and systems to support teachers and students and families doing the work.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. How is that going to be affected by things like, and I mean, this isn't the time for this conversation, just tell me, but by mobility rate, where some of our schools, that thusly our neighborhoods, since we have neighborhood schools, experience really, really significant mobility. I mean, how sticky does that data really become?
It gives us, like I said, it's a snapshot of that year, but it really helps to identify like I said, gaps and strengths. And as that starts moving, you'll start seeing the trend movement in your data as you continue to engage. But it's really meant for us to focus within that year or two. It's really 2 to 3 years prior to the next one, and then take a look back and see if that looks the same or if it has changed. So mobility is always an issue. I know in San Antonio, they administer the tool every single year simply because they want to see this movement from year to year to get faster trend data. And that is typical for areas that have high populations and high mobility. And that's something that is happening in other places in the country. But for right now, this is an ask for every 3 years.
Okay, thank you for being here, and more to come.
Thank you.
All righty. Now we have the scorecard overview, and I think, is it, Dr. Jerry, you going to introduce it, or is
I will.
Dr. Munson?
What we want to do next, and we took an opportunity, we had a relatively light board agenda tonight to spend some time, again, first introducing what we think is an extremely important concept with a potential partner, which we accomplished thus far. And now we want to spend some time with Dr. Munson and Dr. Vosberg and Mrs. Detman walking through an overall presentation about our scorecard. But what will be different this time is we are actually going to present some specific information about and walk you through the weighting for the elementary, which is very similar to the middle school, and the high school scorecard. So we're going to continue to talk about not only how we are performing, but again, walk you through our strategy for how we are going to support our schools with a very clear scorecard that determines what success looks like. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Munson.
Thank you. So tonight I do want to invite you on the journey so that you can walk with us over our 9-month adventure on developing our scorecard. Tonight I do want to give you a high-level overview, and again, some of the slides you've already seen before, but I want to ensure that we are really on the same leg of the journey so that we have a collective understanding of where we've come from and the purpose of the scorecard in general. After my brief overview, I am going to open it up to Dr. Vosberg and Ms. Detman so we can answer questions specifically related to the 2 scorecards that you have in front of you. And again, in addition to slides that you also have an example of the elementary scorecard and the high school scorecard. And you'll start to see some trends, some similarities between the 2, and some differences based on the assessments that we have. Again, our first view on developing the scorecard was to ensure that we truly defined what it means to be the first choice for all families in our district. Why did we do this? Why did we develop a scorecard? We needed to come up with a clear understanding of what our problem was and what our probable solution was. And so these were things that we know we needed to identify. We had already rolled out one scorecard, that was Dr. Jarrett's scorecard, so that we could start to truly highlight and prioritize what was important in our organization. And like Jaime said, we are hyper-focusing on student achievement. But there's a lot to the picture of student achievement, and we needed to do a better job at truly isolating our need in our district and to start to align our resources, align our focus, and start looking at data in the same way at the same time to identify what success looked like. So how did we do that? First, we defined what is truly the purpose of our scorecard. And this is our collective understanding that we truly wanted to define success for schools, to align resources, to improve outcomes for students across the district. How did we do that? We needed to really take a deep look at what we had across our organization, what was expected across our state, to truly start looking at the same data at the same time over our organization. The most important part of this journey is alignment. So you're going to hear us use the word alignment excessively because we truly believe that the key to our success moving forward is to ensure we truly have alignment of goals from our student goal setting up to our district goal setting, and that we are all working together collectively to ensure that we are all moving in the same direction. Again, alignment from the schools to the district to ensure that our goals are the same, we are looking at the assessments, we understand our data, that we're looking at trend data over time, that we're not dropping our history in our past, but ensuring that we're moving forward with a collective understanding of how every single student is doing in our organization. And so what does that look like from the classroom to the district and back to the classroom? And what can we do as a district to ensure that our resources are truly aligned to have the highest level of ROI, or return on investment, to ensure that all of our students are successful? So again, you have 2 scorecards in front of you, and here's the overview. The huge overview of what you have is that we broke the scorecard into 6 components. 5 of the components are in front of you, or 5 sections. The first section truly are our district goals that focus on achievement and the learning environment. And we're going to take a deeper dive in that section in just a minute. Section 2 is about growth and engagement. You'll see that sections 1 and section 2 are about quality instruction in climate and culture. So we really needed to determine what is it in our organization that we need to look at, what emphasis do we need to put on quality instruction in climate and culture to ensure every single student in our organization has the best possible experience, and how can we increase student achievement over time. And that alignment really comes into sections 3 through 5, which we titled as continuous improvement, but that's where the work happens. What can we do at the classroom level, the PLC or the professional learning community level, where departments come together or grade levels come together to share their goals and focus, to ensure that we have alignment from the students to the department level, to the school, to the district. So we are all looking at the same information across our organization. I've included a few slides in here that you haven't seen before. A lot of questions have come up about how do we look at data in the scorecard and how often can we see that data change over time. So I broke apart our entire scorecard into what you can expect as a board to see updated weekly, quarterly, and annually. So based on the access of information that we are given, what can we look at weekly? We can look at chronic absenteeism and we can look at attendance. What can we look at quarterly? And what is really only provided to us annually? Now, the good part, though, is although we only receive these metrics on an annual basis or quarterly basis, we are integrating these assessments into our planning across the year. So even though we only receive SAT and our IAR, which is the former PARC, on an annual basis, we can continue to use that as a target to move forward with our work at the classroom and the school level. So although we only receive that data once a year, and again, that information will be provided on October 31st, we can look at that data over time by using our map and some other growth metrics to ensure that we're achieving those targets throughout our year. So how do we do that? We took our entire scorecard, and again, as I said, we divided it into 3 components. But we looked at it even deeper to ensure that we could truly, through metrics, define success. So that at any point in time, and in our vantage point, we're going to look at it 3 times a year, how are schools doing towards our overall targets? And our scorecard is divided into 70% of quality instruction, and again, that's through achievement and growth, 20% on climate and culture, and we'll talk a little bit about what that is, but through our surveys, through attendance, and through other metrics that we have, and 10% on that continuous improvement. What does our alignment of our goals and targets look like at every single school across our organization? An overview again, quality instruction, climate and culture. Achievement and growth, climate and culture through the learning environment and engagement. We took our scorecard and divided it also into a 6th component that you don't have in front of you, but that's our guiding document from the district, which defines the district support that we are going to give across our organization. We want to ensure that as we move towards our strategic targets, which are listed in the scorecard, what support do we need to give to schools to ensure that they have the data, they understand the data, they can interpret the data, and use that to drive instruction across our organization. So the district support, which we define as section 6, aligns our work here and our collective support to ensure that we're moving all of our strategic targets across our organization. And that's how we're defining district support. So how did we do that across an organization as diverse as we have? Well, we have 9 scorecards, not just 1. But the good thing about our 9 scorecards is that the goals and the targets are the same. But we wanted to ensure that we use our unique programs to identify a metric system that is fair for everyone across our organization, so they know when they are making adequate progress and when they need to stop and reflect. So you have an example of 2 scorecards, but we have a total of 9. But what's great is when we show, and again, we're going to be unpacking the scorecard throughout the year, but in some of our future conversations, you're going to see our data. and we're able to drill down our data all the way to the student level, but the data across our scorecards reflect that particular school's focus. So dashboard. Over this next week, and actually into the week following, we are working with Decision Ed to unlock our dashboards and to bring our Decision Ed partners in to train our organization on how to look at their data and access their data. This is a really exciting turn for us because for the first time, we're going to be able to see data on a daily basis that is updated as frequent as the metrics come to us, and everybody across the organization is going to be able to drill down into their own data. So again, they'll be able to pull up their dashboard, they'll have tabs that match the scorecard, and they'll have widgets or graphs and charts that show their school's data from the school level, the department level, the classroom level, and down to the student level. Okay, and again, the data dashboard matches our scorecard. So when they open up their dashboards, they're going to see their section 1 and section 2 for their school and their students based on the strategic targets that we've created in the scorecards in front of you. How frequently is the data dashboard updated? I just included 2 slides to give you an idea of what it looks like this year and how frequent data is coming into our data warehouse. We've spent the past year and a half bringing our data into the data warehouse from all of our different entities that house our data, and we've brought that into one place. So the data warehouse is a housing center for all of our data and metrics that we now can pull in and see on one screen. So this is just an idea, again, as the data flows through, as it becomes readily available, that comes into our dashboard and is ready and available to each of our schools. And this is the training that we're doing this week. So it gives you an idea based on the elementary and based on the high school, and the level and amount of data that's flowing into the data warehouse. What you have in front of you, and I'm asking Matt just to click on, it's a little bit harder to see up on the screen, so I apologize, but you each do have a copy of the elementary and the high school scorecard. And I just want to give a brief overview of what you see, and then like Dr. Jarrett said, talk a little bit about the points in the scale, and then open it up for questions and discussion. As you can see on the top, is you'll see that we've really, again, divided it from 70, 20, 10, so we've taken our scorecard in 100% and divided it into those 3 categories. Under each of the sections, and again, achievement in the learning environment in section 1, we've broken it into very specific district goals, each that have a strategic target. Our scorecards are not time-bound. We've defined what we believe for each of these entities is where we want all schools to be. But we know that today not every school is going to hit these metrics. So we want to give people credit in their journey. So we've developed a point and a scale system that matches ESSA, which is our expectations, our state expectations for success. And we've assigned point values and a scale system to demonstrate success and progress along the way. So what you have in front of you is that example. So for example, one of our first metrics on the elementary scorecard is the IAR, which is the Illinois Assessment for Readiness, formerly known as PARCC. And based on what is expected at the state level, we've assigned that 6 points. So a school who meets or exceeds the state average, once that information is released, would receive 2 points per grade level for every single grade that matches or exceeds the state average. But if you see in the scale, to determine your success over time, you are in the red or below those 2 points, or 0, if you have decreased success over time. You receive a small amount of points for every strategic goal if you have made any progress at all. If you've hit that strategic goal and you've matched or exceeded the state standard, or if you've matched the state standards, then you would be in the blue, or meeting what we believe is the expectations for that goal. And then blue, or exceeded points, if you've gone above and exceeded that. And we do have some schools right now who are exceeding the state average. So those schools would be in the blue. So again, I know that's a sort of a deep summary. Every single goal will have a formula to determine success so that we can help schools over time, help them understand if they are decreasing, maintaining, hitting expectations, or exceeding expectations. So every single school will have a score or a point system that is scaled per goal, per section, and for the entire scorecard. So Dr. Jarrett will be able to understand which schools are in the blue, which is exceeding expectations, which schools are green, meeting expectations, which are yellow, which are below expectations, or red, well below expectations, or decreasing success over time. This will give us a deeper understanding and an ongoing analysis of how every single school and every single grade level is doing in our organization. And you'll also notice when you take a deeper dive into the scorecard that we've also split it for things like our map to also look at our subgroups to ensure that we are starting to close the gap across all grade levels, across all subgroups, across our organization. So again, I know that is a large analysis and a deep analysis of a complex system. This is something we will continue to unpack over time. We do anticipate very soon that you'll be able to look at this scorecard populated so that you understand where schools are at based on their own metrics. So this will be populated with numbers after we get through our training on our dashboards, so you can have a better understanding of where all of our schools are in their journey to success. Again, you'll see the hyper-focus is truly on quality instruction in climate and culture. But truly we want to align across our organization to ensure that we all have goals focused on these targets. So the work we're doing collectively through continuous improvement, through schools and curriculum, is to ensure that schools have the support to make sure that they have the right school goals, the right PLC goals, and the right classroom goals to start moving our student achievement. So I'll take a step back to let everybody absorb all of that information for a minute, and I'll open it up to discussion with Dr. Vosberg and Ms. Detman to see if you have any questions about where we are in our journey on the scorecard.
Can't get my mic to work. Mrs. McCulloch.
So,
That's a hint, I guess.
you know, I know we talked about having, the 9 because we have these special programs, and I heard you say tonight that they would reflect the school focus. And I guess I keep thinking about what we're talking about, and the school focus is achievement. And so,
Yep, let me clarify
why,
that.
that just didn't.
Yep, so if you were to look at all of them, and they're all along the back, so you will have an example of every single scorecard. So all we did was we took, like if a school houses an elementary program, they have the same elementary goals across the district. But there are some schools like Marshall. Marshall Elementary only goes until 4th grade, where Marshall Middle School starts in 5th and goes through 8th. So their scorecards need to represent both the elementary and the middle school goals. The same with Barber. So schools that have both elementary and middle school, we created a scorecard so they can look at all of their metrics in one place, instead of having a separate scorecard for elementary and a separate one for middle school. But their strategic goals are not different. So they are the same. Now we do have a couple of our scorecards, I don't have this up anymore, but a couple of our scorecards reflect the special population that they have. We only have one scorecard that has different goals, and that one we are establishing right now because it is a special education self-contained program, so their metrics, Wilson Aspire, so their metrics are going to be different. But outside of that one scorecard, they all have the same goals. They'll just have their own in front of them when they open up their own metrics, and when their school scorecards are populated, it will reflect the grade levels in that specific school, and their point value is still out of 100. So it equalizes the points so
That's the
every
key.
single school can be assessed against one another. Otherwise, we would have an imbalanced scorecard, and we wanted to ensure that everybody had an equal weighting across the district.
They all have to add up to 100 points, so we had to make sure we reconfigured, so there's no substantive difference. It's just about weighting differently to make sure it adds up to 100. When you have 9 grade levels as opposed to 5 or 6, you have to make changes.
Mr. Connor?
Well, first of all, I want you to reassure us that this will not be on the quiz.
There will be a quiz.
Okay. I'm just checking. On the same screen, Mrs. McCulloch just asked about, I know I've said this before, so I'm on the school scorecard slide number 15. And so I think what I'll say on this one is that I understand kind of why you're doing this, but I've commented before that this is a little bit apples and oranges for me, because you really do have schools that have multiple programs. And it would seem to me that the scorecards at some point and I'm not trying to change what you've got, so let me make it clear. But I will say, for example, at Auburn, you've really got the end result in the gifted program from Marshall, which is split. That's not split out. Kappa's not split out. And there are others. So my point would be that if we do want consistency at some point, we have to reflect the programs. I will say that I am a little bit confused by Wilson Aspire, only because they have graduation, and I assume the kids don't disappear. So from 6th to 12th, Wilson Aspire should...
That's an error.
Okay. So that was just to
Thank you.
make sure. All right.
Thank you, you
I get
won.
points on the quiz
That's
for
extra
that one.
credit.
I was paying attention.
Extra
Okay.
credit.
I get credit,
extra
yeah.
credit.
Phew. I always need credit, trust me.
Got it.
So I think the other part is, and I need to get to the slides.
Actually, while you're doing that, I want to comment on your point about the programs. So our assessment at this point is we wanted to define what a successful school is in the district. You know, our hopes is that because we have different programs, that those programs are providing a different approach to the educational environment, but the expectations across our district are the same. So we will be able to disaggregate the data and show it by academy, by grade level, by different, you know, at the high school level we can divide it. But really our goal is to ensure that those programs are supplementing the learning environment so that all students succeed.
Well, and I would agree with that on the goal setting side. The only thing I would say is that each program has its own funding. And I think it's a fair question to ask for us when we talk about growth and achievement, is what value, and by the way, I have an undergrad degree in music, so I'm not trying to pick on the arts, but, you know, it would be a fair question to say what academic value is Kappa or any other program in terms of results. So while I grant you that the goals and so forth are the same, totally with you, I think as long as we are, you know, financially supporting programs, I think at some point we are going to, as you said, disaggregate. We're really going to have to show that. As a mechanical thing on the slides that have the dates, I assume when you said target date for availability and it's prior, like as in April of 2018, okay, thank you.
Again, extra credit.
You guys, extra credit? Because I'm going to get so many minus, I have to have the extra credit. Again, as a mechanical thing for Decision Ed, remind us, when did we start planning for Decision Ed? Was that a year and a half ago?
Sure.
2 years?
Yep.
2, okay. And so, yay,
2 years
it's here and it's real, glad to hear it. And you implied this, but will the data and the visualizations or the reporting or whatever be available to board members across all these categories, I assume? So like, if I get in here, I'm gonna have either an icon or something that I can click on and go out to Decision Ed?
Yeah, so we will have a district-facing dashboard, so we'll be able to see all schools in each of the widgets based on the tabs, which are identified in the scorecard, and then schools will have the same for their own specific.
Yeah, so, but
schools will
we
see
as board
schools,
members will be able to see it,
all.
is the point,
Yeah, we'll see the
though.
district data, correct.
Okay,
That is-
so we will have access to this.
You will receive training as well.
Oh, that was, well, thank you for reading my mind. Again, you get extra credit now for reading my mind, which as little as there's left of it. So thank you.
Mr. Siegel, are you done?
Oh, almost,
Okay.
I promise. So will we get the training in like sometime this year, I assume? Or so at a special session?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Dates to be determined. Yes.
Oh, you mean the board? I'm talking, yes, I know, it's.
Yes, we'll add it to a committee of the whole. Right now, what we're doing is we're doing individualized data. The dashboard is not 100% complete at this point, but we're inviting schools and different departments in to just look at the focused areas so that they can drill down. So it's a 1-hour training for.
And I assume the training would include if it has export capabilities like say to Excel or whatever.
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Mr. Siegel.
Looking at the review cycle slide, the weekly review is attendance and chronic absenteeism. I'm assuming that's just for the students. Will there be some measurement also for teacher attendance, sub-fill?
Yep, so the things that you have on the scorecard are things that we are looking at. That's our hyper-focus, our flashlight focus, as we say. So those are the things that we've defined success based on ESSA standards and alignment. We are looking at other data outside of the scorecard, and those are two metrics that we do look at. Dr. Vosberg started 2 years ago looking at some of that, last year looking at that data. So we do have a bit of trend data on that will not be represented in the dashboard because those are not metrics we've chosen to look at in our school scorecard. But those are outside metrics that we've looked at from our strategic plan. So that is other data that we have.
Does the board ever get updated on that other data?
So when we do our annual strategic update, that's where we bring in some of the other metrics. So Dr. Vosberg shared that in the spring. So that's an annual metric that we will share in our annual strategic update, which this year is in June.
Okay, Mr. Rollins?
Yeah, you and I had a conversation last week about this, and sometimes when I think about things over time, I think I've changed my mind, but I'm not changing my mind on this. Okay. And that is that I question whether it makes sense for us to set a strategic goal of meeting the state average as a district, or even more so on a school-by-school basis, whether that is the correct strategic goal. Performance is really based on, nationwide, on demographics. And our school district as a whole probably does not meet the state average demographics. And we have individual schools that certainly don't meet the average state demographics both ways. And so I'm actually concerned about this in both ways, which is from one perspective, that we will set targets that people will see as not being achievable, and with some, I think some reason behind that, where we could be setting a target of saying that school, we want that school to perform in accordance with the state average for schools with those demographics. At the other end of the spectrum, and I heard you say this, that if we have a school that hits the state average, we'll hang up the mission accomplished banner and say, we'll code it blue and say they exceeded the strategic goal. We have maybe a couple of schools in this district where if all they did was hit the state average, I'd code them red. Because looking at their demographics, they should be pulling us up. They should be scoring higher than the state average. Maybe this is too nuanced. Maybe we can't do it. Maybe we just don't have the ability to do it. But, frankly, I would be more comfortable doing a school-by-school target that is based on the demographics of each school and then comparing it to state averages for those same demographics.
I'll respond, and then I'll ask my team if they want to give a deeper response. So remember that the school scorecard is our ideal. So this is our not time-bound analysis of where we want all schools to be. And I would challenge that if we have the right resources in place, and if we have true alignment of goals, and if we have everybody, as Dr. Jarrett says, rowing in the same direction, all of our students should succeed. And we have a lot of data across the nation that says regardless of subgroups, demographics, and other information, all students should succeed. So I do strongly believe at this point that having that target, although for some schools may be a long range and long-term target, that we shouldn't shift that target based on our current performance, but look at our data differently and look at the way that we are providing our resources and support differently to ensure that the students who are not there get there eventually. So that, again, not to lower our bar, but to keep our bar high and do things differently to ensure that the students who need greater support or have a bigger gap can get there over time. For our students who are higher, at the higher level, we do have ways that we can shift their metrics over time. So if they are constantly, exceeding standards, they still need to show growth. So our marshals, for example, if we have a school that is higher performing, they still need to continuously improve, which for some of our students, that is a challenge. But it's in the scorecard, they need to continuously improve in order to show success on their scorecard. So they can't become complacent because then they actually decrease their success. So we have ways to look at that. But the other thing is where the power comes in with the scorecard is not these long-range goals, but those sections 3, 4, and 5, where we work to support our schools to ensure that they truly are hitting they have the right goals and hitting the right targets at the classroom level, that PLC level, and the school level. So they differentiate in their school to ensure the students who have a longer way to go, they should expect a larger rate of improvement over time. So it's really the power of the schools and the work that they do to do things differently and for us to shift our resources differently to hit all students across our district. So I'll open it up to my team to.
I just want to add, I think the biggest thing we'll be able to do is plug actual schools in, and I think you will see that those concerns, particularly when you look at 50% of the student, of the 100 points, 50 points is student growth. So even if you are at the very high end on the attainment side, if you're not hitting those growth targets, that will help. Subgroup performance will help, and ultimately, in terms of giving, and ultimately, if you look at even the attainment, we're saying meet or exceeded, and we're going to expect that there's improvements year over year from schools. So I think we can probably provide some clarification on the attainment side, which I agree with you, we should be concerned about, that there isn't a sense of complacency once you're starting over the state average. There's going to be a need to show improvement year over year, which we can further clarify. But I think when we plug schools in, that will be a helpful exercise, and we can see how this actually works, and we move from the abstract. But your point is well taken, that we do not want these to be unattainable on one side, and that's where time is the variable, but we also do not want these to be too easily attainable, and we will certainly work to make sure that the board is assured that that is not the case.
And then my only other comment, just looking at the high school scorecard, I'm pleased to see that graduation rate is on there. And I'm going to make a similar comment to what I said about the PARCC scores. I'm a firm believer in the law of unintended consequences, and so I believe we should focus on graduation rate, but I also believe we should make sure we send a message that we want the graduation rate to increase without reducing rigor, because there are ways to increase the graduation rate that involve reducing rigor, and that is certainly not what I think we would expect as a board.
Excellent point, and that's why you see weighting for the SAT and the PSAT suite for both growth and attainment weighted very heavily. So if you were to do that by sacrificing rigor, those SAT, PSAT scores would likely suffer. The dynamic will be increasing graduation and on-track rate while increasing growth and attainment on a test that is very rigorous like the SAT.
Thanks.
All right, I have a question for, I think, Mrs. Detman or Dr. Vosberg. This is, the most important thing about the scorecard will be that is gonna identify where your gaps or opportunities are or whatever, but to me, the most important is what happens next. So take an example of an elementary school that discovers they're in the red for reading level attainment at third grade or something like that or whatever. What's the next step? I mean, do they come back to their supervisor, the executive director of curriculum, and say, my kids aren't making it in reading, what do I do? I mean, what would you expect a principal or a school to do as their next step? I don't know if that is clear about what I'm asking or not, but because that's the only way that progress is going to be made, is if they implement new techniques or new training or something.
So that's an excellent question. There's probably more than one good answer. That's why Heidi and I were looking at each other like, who wants to go first? So she can add in what I might forget. Okay. So one of the things we've been doing, and I think you've been a partner in that, or at least been there to observe it, is our smart sharing. So we start with what is working, because I think things that are working at one school can be replicated at other schools. So looking at our data, talking to principals, talking to teachers through the smart sharing process is something we've been doing last couple of years as a way to find success in our district and replicate it in other places. So that's one thing that I think has already been happening, and we're building that. I think MAP has helped us because it's given us a common assessment that tells us what the score should be. And I think there's a lot of ownership around when the data points to a direction and says this is what the expected growth target is, and you're not hitting the target, that leads to a little more sense of urgency around making changes in adult behavior and adapting new techniques, or making sure you're step one is making sure your kids are exposed to what's gonna be on the assessment. And that's a lot of work right there. So that's my short answer.
Okay.
And I'll let Heidi fill in the gaps.
I keep thinking about, okay, well, Reading Horizons was one of the solutions that we implemented to try to address not reading at grade level or whatever, and then we would know whether or not that was working by the data that we were looking at.
So what the scorecard could do and what a deep dive into the data can do is help a school really understand where there is growth and where there is no growth or very minimal growth, either within a grade level, as you mentioned, or a particular subgroup of students, several subgroups of students. So the first thing to do really would be, isolating that need. And then from there, we have several structures in place. For example, smart sharing, where principals and school leadership teams can network with each other. They're all trying to solve similar learning problems, so they can learn from across the district what's going well. We also have open office hours now set up for twice a month for the rest of the year, where any school leader or leadership team can schedule time and kind of order off a menu of supports, where as a team of executive directors, we can rally around them and help think about what resources are at your disposal now. What are your funding streams? How could we, if your issue is really in third grade, how could we use your Title I teacher to really focus their time and your instructional coach to focus their time intentionally and intensively on that third grade team? Could we use grant funding to provide them additional time for collaboration? But I think even before any of that, it's really about going in and observing what kids are learning. One of the most important things we can do is recognize that even when students are far behind, the most important thing to do is to give them exposure to instruction at grade level. And so if that's not happening, then we need to really rally around a plan. And that's where my team, the school leadership team, the continuous improvement team can really come together during those kind of support team visits to help a school leader and their leadership team think through all the options that are out there, from funding to resources to personnel, to then develop a strategy aligned with their need that their data is telling them is urgent because kids aren't growing.
Mr. Escobedo.
When we talk about metrics in our review cycle, for example, the slide, we try to have metrics for the purpose of guiding us in continuous improvement and support, not necessarily, just to have metrics, but so for example, I'm looking at weekly, quarterly, annually. The quarterly and annually seems to me that there are metrics that we're already doing or receiving for the most part. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is, one, in the weekly review cycle, are the metrics that you have here, the review cycle, is that detailed enough? Is that the level of access that you need to be able to see to make corrections as we go forward, right? Because the intent is that we don't get to the end of the school year and realize they could have made changes early on. So we're into 34 school days out of 172. How do we know that those metrics are what we need to measure to make corrections in due time?
So I would add a layer onto this, which is monitoring PLC goals and progress toward those goals at the school level. That's not something that's reported on this dashboard, but it's something that at the school should be an area of intense effort and concentration. I would add, though, that our on-track metrics really do support us, because those are the on-track data, that's the on-track data that our problem-solving teams use to say, last week these kids were not off track, this week they are, how are we going to intervene in the next week? And so that weekly data is valuable. And then I would also add that within those PLC goals, there's teacher created assessments that should align to MAP and align to PARC or IAR, which would help us give us that at this point in time on this journey, here's where we are. And so there's sub-data kind of under this that won't appear on the dashboard, but will be tracked at the school level.
When are we as a board going to start seeing the weekly metrics? Okay, so the question is, when are we as a board going to start seeing weekly metrics?
So we're going to start including the weekly metrics in two ways. One is you're going to start seeing them in the board update. So we've included some metrics at this point, but as far as attendance and now chronic absenteeism, that will be part of your board update. I'm sorry. Right, and On Track will also be, we're looking at it on the dashboard on a quarterly basis, but as On Track information comes to us, it won't be as much weekly, it'll probably be bi-weekly. You'll start to see that information accumulated and put on the board update. We'll also start reviewing that information at Committee of the Whole and through the superintendent updates at ongoing board meetings starting now. So you'll start to see more and more metrics come your way. The other thing to your initial question that I wanted to answer is although some of these, again, this is just a representation of what's in the dashboard as far as front-facing data, but even in our annual metrics, and I mentioned it earlier, but something like the employee engagement survey, although that's only given once a year, we review that feedback on an annual cycle, as I've mentioned before. So we take that information and we really look at it and we do a root cause analysis, and then we do updates, progress updates 4 times a year to see how we're doing. So even though it's a 1-time-a-year metric shown on our dashboard, it's something that we actually action plan and we look at that progress over time. So that's also information such as that are things that you will start to see and hear from us on our progress over time. So some of it will be, again, dashboard-facing data. Other things will be progress or process updates that we will provide to you in both the weekly board update as well as the Committee of the Whole and board updates coming up.
I just want to follow up with Mr. Escobedo's question. When do we anticipate that will be added to the weekly update? How many weeks away are we from the dashboard producing that? Because that is a question I'm continually asked as well.
We could do that next week. So our dashboards are in the final stages of being developed. The 2 metrics that we have here for weekly are active now. So we have training starting tomorrow. We've been working through the weekend to be sure those widgets are ready and accurate and correct. So I would say we could provide those 2 metrics specifically in the board update for next Friday if you're interested.
Okay, thank you. One quick comment. So, as we're focusing on academic achievement, so there's, I'm assuming principals and teachers are on board and are assisting us through all this. But my question is, if you ask anyone, we all have different opinions on how we attack this, right? I'm sure as you as administrators board, you ask each one individual, we get different answers. So my question is, how are we collecting feedback from the plans that are being rolled out for academic achievement? How are we collecting feedback from boots on the ground, from administrators, from teachers specifically, who are seeing, hopefully know better what works, what doesn't, and how are we collecting feedback specifically from them so that if we're rolling out plans, support that is not yielding the improvements that we would like, that we're collecting that feedback from them and continuously rolling it out into other schools and so forth. Thank you. I'm done.
All right, any other questions or comments? Thank you. Okay. We will now move on to our next agenda item, which is new business. Dr. Vosberg's going to present the Rockford System LLC Safeguard donation to Guilford High School, right?
Pretty simple presentation. So actually I just open it up for any questions on the donation. This is, as you can see in the executive summary, it's just a donation for equipment at Guilford High School and their woodworking labs. There's no long-term liability of the district for maintaining any of the work. It's the wiring systems and shields is basically what we're looking at.
Okay. Mr. Connor?
Just want to give kudos to everybody. I think public-private partnership is always the best way to go, so thank you. This is good progress, and I would say if we could really do this across the high schools, that would be great for the other academies where it applies.
Right.
But, to be honest, I don't know what other academies might have this, but again, I think the public-private partnership is really to be commended.
Mr. Rollins?
Yeah, so I read this, and I think it raises some questions. So they came in and did a full inventory inspection of the Guilford High School's tools, machines, and equipment, and came up with a list of machines and tools that would not pass OSHA industry standards. So we've been operating those machines that don't meet OSHA industry standards, and we're fixing them at one high school?
I'm not sure if the machines were operable or if they were just used in storage, so I can check on that.
Could we check on that?
Yeah.
And can we check to see whether anybody's checking to make sure that all of our machines meet OSHA standards at all of the high schools?
I can check on that.
Yeah, thanks. I'd appreciate it.
Any other questions or comments? If not, this will come to a board, be presented at our October 23rd board meeting for a vote. So our next item is the exciting and thrilling board policy updates. And there you go. Ms. Simpkins is here.
Okay,
All right.
okay. If you could bear with me for maybe the next hour, I'll make my way. Okay, so most of the changes.
Is there a motion on that? I'm sorry.
Most of the changes driving these policy changes are changes in statutes that occurred between 2016 through 2018. And I'll just give you a very brief summary. I know you have the summary of the changes here, so I'm not going to read it verbatim, but just some quick highlights. So for operational services, the Public Funds Investment Act was revised to get rid of the phrase short-term obligations and instead allows the board to invest in obligations of corporations that mature not later than 3 years from the date of purchase. Previously, that was for obligations that matured not later than 270 days from the date of purchase. And then Board Policy 5.120 on employee ethics, conduct, and conflict of interest, again revised to reflect changes in the school code and in the Illinois Human Rights Act, specifically adopting the ethics for Illinois education regulations that impose responsibilities for educators to be responsive to students, be responsible for themselves and to their colleagues and to the profession, as well as prohibiting teachers from having an interest in the sale, proceeds, or profits of any book, apparatus, or furniture used in a school. Board Policy 5.190, the proposed revision is with regard to teacher qualifications. As you all are probably aware, back in 2016, there were large-scale changes to the statute that removed the word certified and certifications and now references licensure. So that policy was updated to reflect that. Board Policy 6.150 on home and hospital instruction is the proposed revision captures a 2017 change to statute that allows physicians, assistants, and advanced practice nurses to also write the statement that allows students to be provided with home and hospital instructions. Previously, the statute only referenced that document being written by physicians. Board Policy 7.50, school admissions and student transfers to and from non-district schools is revised to reflect 2018 changes defining accelerated placement for early entrance to kindergarten or first grade, and also student permanent record changes with regard to, the Student Permanent Record Act shall include basic identifying information, including student's name, birth date, and place, and gender. All right. Board Policy 7.60 on students is the proposed revision captures changes in residency laws that require the district to provide parents notice detailing the specific reasons why the administration believes a student is a non-resident of the district. There are also some changes there to capture non-resident and make that to be in accord with the statute itself. 7.10 students, the proposed revision to the health and dental examinations, immunizations, and exclusion of students captures new screening requirements that were announced in the school code for 2017. And then finally, Board Policy 7.185, students, teen dating violence. has proposed revisions to cross-reference other board policies on harassment of students and bullying, and also changes the definition to cover students ages 13 through 21, 13 or older, to capture the idea that students are present in the district through age 21 if they are receiving special education services, where the policy previously went only from 13 to 19 years of age.
Okay. Any questions? These will come to us for approval at our next board meeting on October 23rd. Any other further comments or agenda items for tonight? If not, I will take a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Connor.
Second.
Second by Mr. Seal. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Same sign. We are adjourned at 8:47.